But your mention of my work in London made me remember a funny story. I recently went back to visit my old friends over there just a couple of months ago, and I briefed a mate. He's an Aussie expat, but he's become a British citizen now, and he's been working at 10 Downing Street as an advisor for the last 4 or 5 years. And we had lunch, and I was up to my ears in the carbon price debate. This was around about May, and he said, yeah, well, can you fill me in on what it's all going? I haven't really been following it. I mean, we don't have a carbon price over here, do we? He works in 10 Downing Street, and the carbon price was so not an issue in his or the government's life that he didn't know that the UK had one. My job depended on it in London. Of course we had one. Of course we had one in London. It was part of the European emissions trading scheme. And as a result, investors certainly responded to that investment signal, and the customers that came to the clients of Climate Change Capital, which was the name of the bank I worked in, obviously it was no secret what that bank was about. It was a boutique, had 100 people in it, and our job was solely to try and help companies make investments in the clean energy space. And they were pioneers when they started out sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago. But by the time I'd left there just a couple of years ago, the rest of the market had started to see that this was a really fast-growing investment opportunity, and our competitors then were no longer the boutique guys. It was Ernst & Young and Price Waterhouse and Morgan Stanley. And all of these investors were recognising that it wasn't as risky as people thought, that it was quite easy to understand that clean energy was in fact infrastructure that was long life and attractive to superannuation funds, and in fact lower risk than people thought, and could be constructed domestically, and that was attractive when there was lots of international financial turmoil. And so it became quite a mature and somewhat boring, non-boutique and mainstream investment sector, which was exactly where those pioneers at Climate Change Capital had predicted that it would go. And I think it's a badge of honour for them that they're now competing with much bigger banks to try and do the thing that they know will happen, because the charts we used to forecast were really steep year-on-year growth in investment coming from the US and Europe in particular. So I thought that was interesting, that despite the fact that I'd been mates with him and worked in this field in London while he was working for the government, it was so absorbed in that community, and the economy went on and continued to grow before the financial crash, of course, that it's quite telling that someone can work as close to the government as 10 Downing Street and not consider an issue. So I hope that that gives you some perhaps optimism that when we get through this very difficult negative debate that we're in, probably we'll move on, and the economy and the community will get used to it, I suspect, if the UK experience is anything to go by. They certainly had a debate before its introduction, and that was around 2003, 2004, and then it started in 2005, and now in 2011 he didn't even know it was there. So, to the Australian context, can we catch up, and what are the opportunities if we do? I mentioned Climate Works. We're based at Monash, and we're funded by the Myer Foundation, and we support the Climate Scientists Australia group of independent scientists, and we are linked with an American foundation of the same name. This chart here is what's known as a cost curve chart, and if there was a way to summarise the 150-page research report that Climate Works produced last year, this would be it on one page. I encourage you to read a little more of that. We're pleased to note that it did win the Eureka Prize for Innovative Solutions to Climate Change, which is the science field's research prizes. What this means is this horizontal line represents in volume of emission reductions that can be identified using technologies that are already available or will be during the course of this decade. So that's before 2020. Things you can get off the shelf or are already being piloted so that they would be off the shelf by 2020. The colours represent the sector that those activities and technologies come from. So moving from left to right, you've got dark blue being transport, light blue being buildings, and then the beige colour being industry, so that's manufacturing, and then the red being agriculture, and green being forestry, and the darker grey being cleaner power. In our report, we have labels on each and every one of these little boxes. I've taken them off so that you can see the picture a bit more clearly here. The key thing about these boxes is they each represent an activity that can be individually measured and costed, so that we measure sort of apples with apples, so that if that activity has a common cost to achieve a certain volume of emission reductions, then we'll calculate that. And then if a different activity has a different cost, we show it as a different shaped box. The height of the box represents its cost in dollars per tonne of CO2 avoided per annum. What you'll see is the horizontal line 0 is in the middle of the chart, and the first quarter or so of activity is below the 0 line. What that means is that it in fact pays for itself. That when we calculate the cost of these activities, so transport, buildings and industry, if the labels were on each of those boxes, you would see it's things like improving the energy efficiency in elevators, in appliances, in lighting, in motor systems, in industrial facilities. It can mean insulating fridge doors. It can mean sealing gas pipes, insulating them so that they don't lose as much energy throughout the circulation. Lots of small things like that that we describe very broadly as energy efficiency. You can see I've highlighted there that's what that whole section really relates to. The way we calculate the cost is, what's the cost of the new equipment up front? And it's not free, we know that, so there's an upfront cost. Then we say, how long does the equipment last? Is it a 5-year, perhaps an electronic appliance with 5-year life, or a longer asset, perhaps a 10-year white goods, or more substantial piece of equipment in a factory, for example? Or if it's maybe insulation in a building, then it might have a 40-year life. So you spread the cost of the upfront capital over the life of that piece of equipment. And then you say, so that's that annual cost. And then you say, well, how much extra would I have to spend to operate this piece of equipment? Or, in most cases, how much less do I spend to operate it? Because these are energy efficient pieces of equipment, so you're spending less to operate it because your energy bill is lower. When the box comes out below the 0 line, that means that the amount you save each year from the lower energy bill is more than that year's share of the cost of the equipment. And you can see for vehicles comes out the dark blue transport as the most financially sensible to do. That's because the cost of petrol is higher relatively than the cost of electricity, and you're paying petrol tax as well. And you have your car for quite a long time, so you can spread the cost of the car out over the life of the car. Buildings and industry, though, you'll see they're still hugely more financially better off per annum in a dollars per tonne sense. I don't know if you can see those numbers there, but $50 to $100 per tonne, you can see the average cost saving is about $103 per tonne for those energy efficiency measures. Now, that's not to say that it's easy to do to save that $100 per tonne, because you've got to spread the cost of the upfront capital equipment out over the life in order to be better off. But what it does show is that if you can spread that out, and there are some financing packages that are starting to do this, it tells you straight away that it's worth doing the maths to try and work out how to spread that financing out, because you will be better off. When we move across what we call the cost curve, because these shows the costs, and when you rank them in order, it shapes the curve. You see this middle section here, that's the land sector activity. The red agriculture, that refers to soil carbon sequestration, and there's a range of ways you can do that. For example, in changing the type of crop or moving to a perennial crop that has deeper roots means that it sequesters more carbon as it grows. Also with livestock grazing, you can do things like change the timing of livestock so that when they move onto a paddock after rain, delay their moving into that just a little while so that the sequestering happens most when those grasses are growing. Let them do their sequestering, the CO2 goes down the roots into the soil, stays there, then you can bring the cattle on and they can eat the slightly longer grass. Those sort of timing differences can actually be quantified in terms of carbon savings. And that's what we mean by soil carbon sequestration. There's a lot more research going on and a lot more can be done, but you can see there that it's a large volume of opportunity, particularly compared to what some of the industrial facilities can do. And then, of course, you've got forestry, and this is all forms of forestry, timber plantations where you can earn the revenue, as well as environmental plantations, either that are never harvested or that are harvested in a managed way. You can see they're a very large opportunity. Average cost, about $18 a tonne.